So sugars overall produce a more powerful response. It produces more release of a chemical in the brain called dopamine that underlies our ability to derive pleasure and learn about rewards in the world. You can't easily fool the brain by ingesting artificial sweetener.
Today, we have a very special guest, Ivan De Araujo. So I hope I pronounced it the Brazilian way. And with Ivan, we will be talking about the brain, about the gut, and how they both communicate and how we can actually improve our health by understanding the way how brain and gut are working together. Ivan De Araujo is a leading neuroscientist and director at the Max Planck Institute for Biological Cybernetics. Before that, he held senior research positions at Yale University and the Icahn School of Medicine in New York. With a career that began in philosophy and artificial intelligence before moving into physiology and neuroscience at Oxford, his pioneering work explores how the gut and the brain communicate, shaping food preferences, metabolism, and mental health. Ivan, it's such an honor to have you here today. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I'm really glad we can do it.
Yeah.
Did we get everything correct in the research about your track record?
Hopefully.
Yes.
Probably. We missed
Pretty good.
probably.
Yeah. No. It's perfect. Thank you.
Very impressive, Ivan. But now you're working in Tübingen, right?
Yes, I am now one of the directors of a institute, one of the Max Planck Institutes in Tübingen, called the Institute for Biological Cybernetics, which was founded a few decades ago with at the time putting forward this cutting edge idea that computers and brains perform somewhat of a similar role. So the idea was to study the brain of organisms as information processing systems, right? As much as computers. And this idea, of course, gained traction over the years, but basically this was the original idea from some visionary people at the time. And we decided to keep the name for as long as it's possible, as a kind of a tribute to the originators of the institute.
Super interesting. Wow. And so in general, you feel good in Germany. How is Germany treating you? Are you feeling good, like in comparison to New York and everywhere you've been already?
Yeah, I mean, of course it's different from New York, right? But Tübingen is a college town, which I very much like. I lived in college towns before. I lived, as you mentioned, in Oxford for several years. I lived in New Haven, where Yale University is located. So I really like this environment of this compromise between size and international community. So I think Tübingen has this kind of vibe of being a small city, very livable, but at the same time you have people from everywhere. So it's kind of fun living there, a little bit away from the chaos of New York. Yeah, I was born in a very big city, way bigger than New York actually, and I don't really miss it. So I'm happy in this kind of environment. Yeah.
Very nice. So, and how many years are you studying now the communication between brain and gut?
Well, this is going to be, I would say, over 15 years, something that is started as a kind of a side project for my postdoc and developed like the questions started arising over the years, one after the other. And for my PhD, I studied the human brain. I used at the time new techniques that are no longer new to study how human brains react to food. So at the time, this was kind of new. So I tried to understand how the human brain represents the flavor and the memories of food in its structures. And then I evolved into more physiological work later. But overall, this idea that the gut is talking to the brain directly, I would say, yeah, 16 years, 17 years ago, I started with the first experiments.
Wow. And since then, probably a lot has happened, right? I mean, it seems like that the gut-brain axis and the vagus nerve is kind of hitting mainstream at the moment.
Yeah, this
Is
is
that,
yes,
yeah,
exactly. This is super interesting to see because at the time, people were like, what you're talking about, right?
I
So I
guess.
remember I sent grant proposals in the US to get funded for studying how the gut communicates with the reward system. And the comments were like, what this has to do with anything, like, this is totally like nuts. Why don't you focus on something better established? And now it's like everybody always knew about it, right? So it's very interesting to see how the culture changes. And this is now a very hot topic, this idea of body-brain communication, the functions of the non-obvious functions of the vagus nerve, and this bidirectional crosstalk between the brain and the gut and how it impacts our not only our digestive health but also our mental health ultimately. Yeah.
And how did that make you feel back then when people were saying, "Hey, this is the wrong topic. Maybe you should focus on something else"? And then it seems like, yeah, you stuck to it, so you were really
Yeah,
convinced that this
I'm
important.
kind of, yeah, stubborn, and I had this feeling that there was something there. I was
Gut feeling.
probably not, yeah, exactly, yeah, not articulating it very well, possibly, or I hadn't done all the experiments I could have at the time. But I feel there was something there because things were like matching together. They made sense, right? So I predicted something. I did a new experiment. It kind of matched more or less what I expected. So you have this feeling that things will work out in the end. So I never really gave up. There were times where, I mean, you worry about how to fund your lab and support the people who work with you. But overall, I never felt that I should change topics or follow what other people were doing just for the sake of it. Yeah.
That's interesting. It's a bit off topic, but you mentioned that probably it's sometimes a better idea to focus on topics that are better investigated, or where more funds are in. So, how exactly does it look like if you, for example, are trying to make do science in a new field? Like, where do you get the money from? How does it work? What happens if you don't get any funds? Like, the research just doesn't continue, or how does it work?
Yeah, this is a good question. So it depends a lot on the funding mechanism you're looking for. In the case of North America and especially the US, the main funding source for biomedicine, right? For medical science related investigations is the National Institute of Health, which provides grants to investigators, and they are kind of more conservative. They like kind of incremental science. So you build on what people have done before, right? So you don't kind of go out and look for things that are not certain. So they like some sort of continuation. And when you go off a little bit, either from your area or your perceived area of specialization, or into a topic that it's kind of too innovative, they feel like this is going to be a waste of time and money. You shouldn't go there. So very often it's difficult for investigators. to find funding. Sometimes you can find private funding from industry, for example, that may like the idea, or you can get some very particular types of grants where they invest in the investigator as opposed to investing in the project. But these are rare, and they come and go, and you have to be really well connected to get those. So in that sense, Max Planck, the philosophy underlying Max Planck, the Max Planck Society, is wonderful because they really give freedom to investigators to work on the topics they judge important, not necessarily what other people decide what is important at a given moment, right? So, but it's very difficult. It's not easy, and on one hand, it makes sense. You don't let people go out there and do crazy stuff. But on the other hand, the system needs innovation and mutations, right, in
Yeah.
order to evolve. And it's very hard to find that balance. And usually scientists like to be a little bit more conservative, not necessarily for bad reasons, but that's how they are. They like to make sure that things are moving on slowly but surely. But then you may eventually get stuck in a dead end, and that's not necessarily good. Yeah.
So
Yeah, that's
maybe one question in terms of if you say 15 years plus research has flown into this, did you start with a certain goal of finding something? And if yes, what is that? Or is it more about understanding it better and then some new ideas and understandings will arise? So maybe you can tell us a little bit about how close you think you're getting to the finish line of finding what you're looking for,
Yeah,
or
no, yeah, in this case, I mean, for the case of the gut-brain idea, was really, we can call it curiosity driven because I was somewhat accidentally told about a type of mouse, like a rodent, that had a mutation that did not allow them to taste certain tastes. They had a genetic mutation that made them incapable of tasting sweetness, for example, among other things. But they were kind of sweet blind. And I started by becoming curious about whether these animals would develop an interest in sugar even if they could not taste it. And then I played with a number of possibilities, but eventually I settled with a protocol. They were just like freely moving around, and they had their freedom to choose where to consume nutrients from. And very interestingly, I quickly noticed that even though they could not taste sugar, they were capable of uh, uh, preferring and ingesting amounts of sugar that were basically comparable or the same as a normal animal. So that basically told me that there was something inside the body of the animal that was telling the brain, this whatever I just ate is important for my body. It's giving me energy, and I should consume more of it in a way that was totally independent of their ability to taste the pleasurable sensation of sweetness. And basically, that's how I started. So then I became curious about how the brain reacts to such things, and how is it possible that the gut communicates this signal to the brain, and it went from there. So it was not like a really, I never had a very clear goalpost like from the outset. I really like to look at the data and reinterpret and change it, and I am very like pragmatic and open-minded about the experiment. So very easily we can change directions based on what nature is telling us. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And talking about sugar, I think it's a pretty important topic. What is your take on sugar? Like, on the one hand, it's giving energy and a quick source. Are we talking about sugar from chocolate, or are we talking about sugar from potatoes? And how bad is sugar from your your perspective?
Yeah, from my perspective, as you say, I mean, it's important to um, um, dissociate the idea of sugar from carbohydrates in general. Although I hear many podcasts and influencers talking about carbohydrates and sugars as if they were the same thing, but they are
Yeah.
very different, right?
Uh-huh.
So sugars, I think, taking the word a little bit informally, I think is meant to designate refined sugars, processed sugars that are very easily absorbed by the organism, right? Like the ones we have in soda cans or industrialized fruit juice and the chocolate, maybe. So these are sugars, these are carbohydrates that have been treated or processed, and when ingested, they get into the bloodstream very quickly. Versus the more general carbohydrate idea that are complexes formed by simple sugar molecules like a glucose or fructose, but are much less easily digestible. And many, and we can give as an example fibers, which are present in vegetables, in legumes, seeds, etc. That are so these are very different compounds in terms of how the body treats them, sugar versus complex carbohydrates like starch in potatoes. So it's important to make this distinction. When we talk about sugars, in refined sugars, my opinion is that they have an overall negative impact on the body that it's hard to deny, right? So if you look from the physiological point of view, this rapid absorption of sugar into the bloodstream can cause reactions like exaggerated insulin release that may amount to eventually insulin resistance and other issues. And in addition, they have an impact on the brain and based on our work on the reward system of the brain that in a very unnatural or artificial way engages the reward system in the brain in a way that can facilitate the development of certain behaviors that we would call cravings, for example, or maladaptive consumatory behaviors, right? So
Mm-hmm.
inappropriate consumption of certain foods, even if your physiology does not require it. So I think based on this distinction, sugars, as in refined sugars, in industrialized, I think they have these problematic effects on the body physiologically in terms of pancreas physiology, but also on the brain, versus carbohydrates, complex carbohydrates, including fibers, that overall, my reading of the overall data is that they are very clearly beneficial to human beings in the long term. So it's very important to not confuse things, right? So sometimes we hear about certain diets that avoid carbohydrates. You shouldn't eat carbohydrates.
Yeah.
But you can't really compare different foods just because they have carbohydrates, right? So it's a catch-all name that doesn't mean much physiologically speaking.
Interesting.
And if we talk about artificial sweeteners versus industrial sugar. Of course, since years and years going on, big brands started marketing products that are zero sugar, but then do have artificial sweeteners inside of them. And also in Germany currently, there's some brands that are really hyped that are using these artificial sweeteners within their products. So we also wanted to ask you and see what's your take on this differentiation between then what we already distinguished, that industrialized sugar is not ideal for the body, and how is it with the sweeteners for the gut and also for the brain?
Yeah, so yeah, this is also, so if you think about artificial sweeteners, I mean, you would think it's a great idea, right? So you can emulate or mimic the pleasurable sensation of sugar without loading your body with refined sugar, right? But then the devil is always in the details. So the different artificial sweeteners have been developed over the years, but I think overall, the data, including the World Health Organization, like a survey, concludes that artificial sweeteners did not really impact on driving body weight overall down, right? So the use of artificial sweeteners does not seem to contribute in any way significantly to lower body weight or attenuate obesity. And also, again, based on our work, I would say that this may be based on the fact that the way the brain reacts to artificial sweeteners seems to be very different from the way it reacts to sugars.
Really?
As I was saying, you don't need to taste sweetness for your brain to tell that sugar has been ingested, right? So as a development of this idea, it is indeed true that our reward systems in the brain, they respond differently to artificial sweeteners compared to how they respond to sugars. So sugars overall, I mean, to simplify it a little bit, I would say produce a more powerful response. It produces more release of a chemical in the brain called dopamine that underlies all our, let us say, motivated behavior, our ability to derive pleasure and learn about rewards in the world. So the brain can tell, you can't easily fool the brain by ingesting artificial sweetener. So this is one thing. So behaviorally speaking, our brains are not convinced that we should switch, right? We may even use artificial sweeteners in a group of products, say sodas, etc., but then we may overcompensate by looking for other sources of calories because it's not really as effective as we would like to. But then there is a second topic, which is what do they do to the organism, and in particular, how do they impact on the gut? So there has been a lot of debate. This is a very complex topic because there are many toxicological studies that were performed over the years. If you use in these studies doses that are approximately similar to what a human being would consume, there was no effects or negative effects that were reported, at least initially. So there is nothing obvious that your body is going to suffer if you ingest artificial sweeteners to an amount that is reasonable, right? However, more recent research, as the technology developed and the studies on the gut microbiome developed further, the technology that is used to sequence the genes of bacteria and identifies bacteria in the gut became got improved, then there are several studies that suggest that artificial sweeteners may in fact change the composition of the gut microbiome. And this is a somewhat general statement, but it is true that changing the composition of the microbiome is linked, at least epidemiologically, to a number of issues. For example, inflammatory bowel disease, food intolerance, and generalized inflammation, and so on. So, in principle, it does not seem to be a good idea to change your microbiome in a way that it's uncontrolled. It's not, let us say, designed, right? So, and artificial sweeteners may just do that. So there are these two aspects of it. One is artificial sweeteners do not seem to really mimic what sugars do to the brain. So the brain responds differently. So the brain somehow knows unconsciously that this is not sugar, right? Even if we not necessarily process that information consciously in a way that we can report it, the way the brain works is not fully conscious, and you can see that the responses do not match completely. And on the other hand, there is, I think, reasonable evidence thus far that this that the prolonged use of artificial sweeteners may change the identity and the communities of microbes that live in the gut and are very important for maintaining our overall health.
And the industrial sugar also affects the microbiome as well, right? So how much worse is one or the other? If someone wants to drink, let's say, a soda, and the person wants to decide, am I going for the zero product or am I going for the original with the industry sugar? What's the better choice, or is both as bad and it's just doesn't make a difference?
I would say that they are both bad for different reasons, right? So I think the consumption of sugars has two aspects. One is the one I mentioned, the impact on physiology, insulin, the impact on the brain. But also the fact that I think that even more relevant is the fact that they may drive people away from the important carbohydrates, right? So these refined industrialized sugars, they are, as I said, very digestible. So they are absorbed in the upper part of the intestine, and they enter into the portal vein, go to the liver, and so on. Complex carbohydrates, they are not easily digestible, and they a good amount of this carbohydrate ends up in the lower parts of the intestine, where most of the microbiome lives. And that's where the bacteria that live in our guts will start processing these complex carbohydrates, and because they, let us say, quote unquote, eat these carbohydrates, they release chemicals that they metabolize that happen to be very important for our body. So these are called bacterial metabolites, usually short chain fatty acids that communicate with the immune system and play a big role, at least in gut health. So the problem with refined sugar is that they do not play this role of feeding beneficial bacteria that may live at the lower parts of the intestine. They end up getting to the circulation, let us say, too early. And this is exactly because it is industrialized, and it does not really match the original carbohydrates that we evolved for consuming over hundreds of thousands of years of hominid evolution. So I think this is the one of the big aspects, that the refined sugar, in addition to its negative effects that they may have, and that may be more or less pronounced between people, they may drive individuals to rely on them for their carbohydrate intake, avoiding or let us say preventing people from fully ingesting carbohydrates that are very important for our health overall. So I wouldn't I wouldn't put people I wouldn't give people this choice. I think the best is to somewhat get away from both of them, and look for some more, let us say,
Natural
natural.
sweets.
Yes,
Honey
natural
is.
carbohydrates. Yeah, carbohydrates that exist in nature that haven't been processed, and that are going to feed the complex ecology we have in our bodies. Yeah.
Of course. So this is one thing, like carbohydrates, like potatoes, for example, or something that is prebiotic to our gut. But if I, for example, order coffee, and I have I have honey here, for example, and I have agave syrup. But this is both, like it's natural more or less, but it's is it the same impact, or what can I choose, or do I just have to just
Yeah, I mean, I think, yeah, I don't know much about the processing of, say, honey or agave in terms of how quickly is digested, but I would say the more difficult it is for the gut to digest and absorb it, the better, right? Because there is this opportunity for some of these carbohydrates to go uh, lower into the intestine and be processed by bacteria, allowing them to proliferate. There is also interesting data that even if you consume refined sugars, if you do so in combination with complex carbohydrates, with fibers, for example, you slow down the rate of digestion just due to the complexity of the amount of things you have at the same time in the gut. So the peak, so the glycemic index, right, of this consumption is going to be lower than the refined sugar itself. So even if you can't get away from sugar completely, do not ever forget about the natural carbohydrates, which is something that people confuse, I think, sometimes, and make this mistake, like, oh, I had a can of Coke, so I won't eat my legumes or vegetables because I already consumed sugar, and you can't really make this type of a linkage directly. Yeah.
hmm And let's imagine the situation, like we had some legumes and some fruits, and it's going down the digestive system. When does the gut actually communicate with the brain, and what type of signals are being sent? Like, what type of communication is it? I mean, I know that it's the vagus nerve, which is supposedly like going from the gut to the brain. I know that we can stimulate the vagus nerve, but we can talk about this later. And I'm interested in the communication. Like, what exactly are they talking about, and how can we maybe also use this knowledge? Like influence the communication, influence the state of mind, the mental health through our through the food, and vice versa.
Yeah, this is a very good question, and it's also something that isn't completely clear. Um, on one hand, it does seem that the vagus nerve is really the main route by which macronutrients communicate with the nervous system, and there is also evidence that depending on the type of micronutrient, you may or may not involve the vagus nerve. So in the case of sugars, of refined sugars, because they are not, they don't need to be processed by the gut. The impression that our work gives is that they do not care about the vagus nerve. So they kind of get into the bloodstream. And as early as the portal vein is a big vein that connects the intestine to the liver. So it's the main route of most nutrients from going to the intestine to the liver. So the portal vein is very clearly sensitive to sugars. And we believe that the portal vein may be releasing something, or it may be activating some nerves that then tell the brain about the presence of sugars. When it comes to foods that need to be digested, then it's more clear that the communication depends on the vagus nerve. So when we talk about proteins and fats, and I believe complex carbohydrates, then because the vagus nerve is very important for digestion, it is the nerve that initiates things, for example, like gallbladder contraction for bile salt release into the duodenum. It makes the pancreas to release factors into the intestine that helps with digestion, for example, amylase. So the vagus nerve coordinates these secretions into the duodenum, the movement of the duodenum, the upper part of the intestine. So the vagus nerve is very important for digestion. And I believe that because the vagus nerve is working for promoting digestion, it is at the same time telling the brain, look, there is a lot of food here, and you should know about it, and you should learn whatever behavior you just did to obtain all this food, because we want to repeat it in the future because we need food every day, right? So this is what the vagus nerve is doing. My idea, for which I don't have proof yet, but we are trying to work on this now, is that processed foods bypass this basic system that exists in our body, where the vagus nerve digests food and tells the brain about the presence of food. And easily digestible food bypass the system, and they affect the brain in a way that is much more exaggerated than the foods that we consume, the whole foods, let us say,
Right.
because they get into circulation much faster, and they may access the brain in a way that complex foods do not. So if you eat your potato with some lentils, let us say, it will take a considerable amount of time until the gastrointestinal tract can handle it and transform it into energy that eventually will reach the bloodstream, as opposed to something that in 1 minute is going to change your physiology, like sugar. So that's my idea, that the vagus nerve is involved in this communication, is the main route, as long as we talk about foods that need proper digestion. When we talk about processed foods that have been made to be very easily digestible because the industrialization process itself replaces a lot of these steps, these physiological steps of digestion, then the vagus nerve may not be relevant. And that's my belief, that even for carbohydrates, if you talk about complex carbohydrates, you need the vagus, whereas for non-complex carbohydrates like simple sugars, glucose, fructose, sucrose, then these things bypass the ability of the vagus nerve to tell the brain about them, and then even be involved in their digestion.
So would that also be like a pasta, because it's processed wheat or whatever?
This is an interesting question. I'm not really a specialist on this, but I know that people have looked at this, at different types of pasta, because you can have, like, say, whole grain pasta versus versions that are more processed. and this can range. There is a range of pasta types of pasta that can be very beneficial in terms of how much fiber you consume and how much of a boost you are giving to your microbiome versus some that are much more easily digestible and do not really contribute in the way that the more. So I think, yeah, again, there is a whole world there of potential manufacturing of different types of pasta that can go in different ways. There is some very interesting work on for example, even pasta like when you have them cooked and then made cold again, they may become less digestible if you change the temperature, and you may be providing yourself with more fibers or complex carbohydrates than you would if you had just cooked and ate and eaten them.
Yeah.
So
Also
there
with
is a lot of complexity there. Yeah.
Also with rice and potatoes, I've also heard
Rice,
many times
potatoes, bread
if
is
it cools
another
off
good.
and then you put it in the fridge and you get more starch, right? Yeah.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, exactly. And even yeah, there are some recipes in different parts of the world where very interestingly people eat salads based on cold potato, for example, or cold like starch that intuitively may have been found to be good for your health for reasons that people didn't know years ago. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes, it's super interesting. A friend of mine actually has a lot of problems with her digestion, and she's Italian, so eating pasta like traditionally every day. And at one point, we figured like maybe you should leave the pasta out and just see however your body reacts to it. And actually, right now, she did it for a couple of months, and her resume was that she's better now. The digestive system is more calm, and I think like as we don't understand complexity of the body, even though we have so many informations right now, it's still like always a good idea to just experiment with different
Yes.
things, and to find out, okay, what is my body needing, and yeah, so pretty
Yeah,
nice.
there is huge individual variations when it
Right.
comes to tolerance, intolerance. Another big topic, we may talk about it later, is individual variations in the microbiome that may be related also on they certainly participate in the way foods are digested and absorbed. So yeah,
Yeah.
definitely experimenting, as long as you don't go into the easily digestible industrialized world, which clearly puts you closer to the obesity, diabetes range, then definitely experimenting is what cultures have been doing for thousands of years. Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah.
So maybe a anecdote from me personally, and I've also shared this in the podcast previously, that at the beginning of my 20s, I had discovered that I have leaky gut and generally dysbiosis in my gut, which brought me on the journey of learning more about the gut and the gut-brain axis, etc. So especially interesting today for me. But before I realized that I had a leaky gut and what that even means, I had brain fog and was generally not feeling well mentally. And then I went to a psychotherapist in Cologne for the first time, and I said, "Hey, yeah, I'm not feeling well. What is the problem?" And then luckily, the person realized, "Hey, you do not have a mental situation. It's something else. You need to go on to the next doctor and kind of figure it out." And also, luckily, I had the hint from my parents. My dad is a general doctor, and my mom was a natural practitioner. And they said, "Hey, you should check out your gut and see maybe if there's an issue lying there." So I went to this doctor in Cologne, who then did microbiome tests, and then we found out through certain markers that I had a leaky gut. And he was also mentioning to me, "Hey, probably also your brain fog, etc., and not feeling well is coming from your issue with your gut. So let's work on your gut and get the gut lining sealed up, so not the bad things or the things that shouldn't go into the bloodstream go into this direction. So that's really when I started then to change my diet. From processed foods to natural foods. I started drinking less alcohol. And quickly, after a couple of weeks and months, I started noticing huge changes from mentally being clear to allergies going away, food intolerances were getting less and less. So this was like the huge aha effect for me to notice, okay, wow, you can change a lot of your health situation by changing how you eat and how your gut lining is the status, let's say. So coming from that story to the question to you, how do you think leaky gut is connected then to the gut-brain axis and the vagus nerve? And why do so many people today have this issue of having a leaky gut?
Yeah, this is a great question. So just to introduce the terminology a little bit. So the leaky gut is somewhat of an informal expression that means that the natural barrier, the epithelial barrier that separates the outside from the inside is not totally functional, right? So the gut epithelium is made to be selectively open. So you want nutrients to get in. So once you break down carbohydrates or proteins into, say, amino acids, etc., you want them to go into your body to be used as energy, but you don't want other things. For example, microbes that always come with your food. If you eat a sandwich in New York, you're going to get a lot of microbes that you don't want into your blood for sure. So this barrier, that is a complex system that involves both the epithelial cells in the gut and the mucosal layer that sits over it, sometimes becomes deficient. We know that one major factor influencing the effectivity of the seal in the gut is the microbiome. So when the leaky gut means that the gut became less selective, less picky about what should get into the bloodstream.
So it's kind of like a border patrol that
It's a
lets
border
the important
patrol,
stuff
yeah,
in.
but then yes, but there are like cracks in the on the wall that let things get in, and the way the cells connect to each other. So there are some proteins called tight junction proteins that make the epithelial cells kind of bind together. They are holding each other's hands through these proteins. And we know that a healthy microbiome, especially a microbiome that contains a sufficient number of lactobacilli species, enhances the amount of tight junctions in our guts. So because these lactobacilli, they release some chemicals that the epithelial cells themselves detect, and that tells the cells to move the tight junctions to the surface. So when you have a deficient microbiome, this aspect of the gut is damaged. Another aspect of the leaky gut is, as I say, the mucosal layer. The mucins, which are like glycoproteins, are complex chemicals that are released by gut cells themselves. And they lie on the surface of the epithelium, and they serve as a very fundamental barrier also to protect the gut. So when you have a deficient amount of mucus in the gut, you are much more likely to have not only a leaky gut, but to suffer from damage in the gut epithelium. So the one of the factors that cause the mucosal layer to be deficient is, on one hand, an abnormal microbiome, but also altered psychological states, because the release of some of this mucus is also under the control of nerves that originate in the brain and innervate the glands in the gut. So the reason why people develop those is complex. It can be based on diet that can alter your microbiome. And as you mentioned, you experienced improvements by changing your diet, changing your lifestyle, let us say, that eventually resulted in an improvement that can be explained possibly by correcting some of the dysbiosis, but also the integrity of the barrier can be damaged whenever there is a psychological states associated with, say, chronic stress or other types of distress that people may experience. Yeah.
So the leaky gut, if I can resume, it can be, or probably it is for most people, a mix of various things, right? It's maybe like food, not proper food for our bacteria. Then the bacteria in the gut change and the composition changes. And I would love to hear what you have to tell us about composition of bacteria, because I think this is crucial. And then also stress, like living this super fast life, etc., which is like everything basically comes down and attacks more or less the harmonious system in the gut, right? So it's
it's very clear that, for example, organisms that are obese, that are exposed to an unhealthy, what we call Western diet, they develop leaky gut. And in experiments where you make microbiome transfers, you take the microbiome from one search organism and you implant it in an otherwise healthy organism, this latter organism is going to suffer metabolic consequences very similar to the obese, including weight gain. So definitely and leaky gut. So definitely an altered microbiome is one factor accounting for a good amount of the effect in many cases, right? But the causes are complex, and as I mentioned, you may have, even in an otherwise healthy person, psychological distress and chronic stress can also lead to a deficient barrier, because the way the nervous system is controlling the secretions in the gut is altered, and you may have these impairments. But yeah, I would say that exposing yourself to an unhealthy diet is definitely very efficient in bringing you into the realm of a leaky gut.
Yeah. Various questions popping up now. What I'm interested in, like if a person has leaky gut, right? And the bacteria composition is bad. Would you say, like from the scientific point of view today, that gut can regenerate fully to a 100% healthy gut? If you damage, I don't know your take on antibiotics, but it's like scientifically proven that antibiotics can at least kill, it's the job, to kill bacteria. So it does this. And sometimes people need a lot of time to regenerate from it. Would you say that there is damage in the gut that is irreversible, or do you think that whatever condition a person has, it is possible to regain full health?
Yeah, this is a very good question. So, and it has a complex answer. So, I would say in a very general way that it is possible to restore, right, the microbiome. However, we do not have yet the tools or the ability to manipulate the microbiome efficiently. So one of the most efficient ways to promote a healthy gut, including a healthy microbiome, seems to be the consumption of prebiotics, especially fibers, as opposed to trying to restore the microbiome itself. So there are some interesting studies using antibiotics in humans where people looked at the time taken for the microbiome to recover compared to before. And there are some interesting designs. And it is shown that when you provide a fiber-enriched diet, you may be able to restore most of your original composition in a way that is more efficient than taking supplements themselves, right? Because the supplements, they contain, the probiotics, which we know are good, but we don't really understand how this, what numbers of bacteria, what kinds, and how to really deliver them. So it seems that providing the substrates for bacteria seem to be fairly efficient. So some people propose, for example, that after antibiotics, you may have a auto transplant of your own microbiome. So you save your microbiome before you take antibiotics, and then eventually you reimplant it, and you eventually you recover. Even when you don't do much, if you keep a healthy diet, you tend to recover most of it also in ways that may be even better than taking supplements. So I think the answer. Oh, huh?
Has that been tested, or is it just a theory?
Yeah, there are experiments where this type of design was used, where different groups of people were exposed to antibiotics. In some cases, they didn't do anything, just waited. Then people were supplemented with probiotics, and in some cases, they were supplemented with prebiotics, with fibers. And there was a follow-up looking at the genetic composition of the microbiome. And when you look at the composition of the microbiome in the follow-up, they tend to be very close or similar to the pre-antibiotic period, especially when you have a sufficient amount of prebiotics. And the effect seems to be better than the supplementation with the so-called probiotics that we know are beneficial bacteria. I just mentioned lactobacilli. We know lactobacilli release a number or a very important anti-inflammatory metabolites that they produce, so they definitely need to be there. You don't want to lose this type of bacteria, but we don't have yet a fully rational, controlled way to know about the numbers needed and when to best intervene. So it seems that this more, let us say, natural way of letting the bacteria grow, as long as you give them what to eat, is fairly efficient, and may be related to why consuming enough fibers seem to be related to long-term health benefits more than any other type of diet out there.
It's interesting that you mentioned like some kind of memory of bacteria, because like an example, when I was 16, 17, I had a lot of inflammation of the amygdala.
The tonsils, tonsils,
I had it like maybe 10 times a year. It was crazy. And my doctor at some point, she was telling me, okay, Nikki, if it
Take it out.
comes one more time, then we will cut them out. I don't know why, like it was it was a miracle. After she said that, I think my body was in shock, and I didn't get any like for 2-3 years. So I still have them. But in those years when I did not have any consciousness about taking antibiotics, like the doctor gave it to me. I was like, yeah, let's go. Like I want to
Uh-huh, uh-huh.
go to school, or I want to go partying, so whatever, give it to me so I can be healthy again. And then after all these years, I realized, wow, I really damaged probably my gut through all those antibiotics I took
Yeah.
over these years. But still, if you consider the amount of antibiotics I took, and still my digestion was always great. I did not have any allergies. I'm healthy. And so I think some kind of memory thing is there. Probably, I think it makes sense, and it can recover simply by giving the right foods again, as before. Like I had a good
Yeah, yeah.
nutrition because my mom always was cooking freshly, with a lot of different things. So my mom is Polish, so we have a lot of traditions which are good for the gut. Not all of them, but some. For example,
What cup?
sauerkraut. Like, and my mom did it like herself. Also, my dad does it still himself. And I think these rituals, these traditions can really help improve gut conditions strongly. Um, yeah, amazing, super interesting. Wow.
Yeah, yeah, no, I think your experience matches this what I just described. Yeah, there is this tendency, or at least this potential for recovery, as long as you provide the correct substrates to the gut. Yeah.
And are you aware of this current trend, at least in Germany, of effective microorganisms? It's like a living culture drink, or a living probiotics that is a blend of various or strains of probiotics in one drink, and you would take, let's say, 20 milliliters or 10 milliliters a day. And the suggestion of these manufacturers is, and I think this originally comes from Japan, that this is better received from the body as a live culture in comparison to, let's say, a powder supplement, which I believe is shock frozen and then brought into powder form, and then usually into capsules, and people take the probiotics. So do you have any experience on this topic?
Yeah, I don't know this product. Maybe I heard about it in German and I didn't understand what it was. But I think one important thing about the supplementation, and I'm not going to speak to this product because I haven't looked at it. But what seems to be very important is that when you ingest probiotics, you have to have the gut environment ready for it, or able to promote the colonization and proliferation of this bacteria. And I
Yeah.
think forgetting this aspect is the reason why the data is so confusing on supplementation. There is a lot of negative results associated with consuming bacteria. And in many cases, this leads to an incorrect skepticism and negativity about the importance of the microbiome, because even in scientific circles, there is a lot of pushback, and people say, did you see this study? They ate loads of lactobacilli and nothing happened. It's totally useless. So I think we have to remember that bacteria are living creatures that need an environment like the pH, the substrates, what kind of carbohydrates, what kind of how much how healthy your liver is, that is producing the bioacids that to a great extent affect the ability of this bacteria to survive or not. So all these factors must be taken into account. We also don't completely know yet what bacteria are really probiotic in the sense of if consumed in appropriate amounts will produce health benefits. We know about lactobacilli and bifidobacteria, but they are relatively a small population among all the other trillions of bacteria. So we don't completely understand that yet, right? So it does seem that providing the substrates and making sure you have a healthy gut is the most important aspect, even compared to ingesting directly the living microorganisms that may not be able to survive in an environment that is not favorable to them. So I think there are now better and better products that have a more, let us say, holistic approach where there is a prebiotic or symbiotic aspect to it, that in addition to the microorganisms, there is enough substance there for these microorganisms to drive. But I would say there is a lot of work to be done because it's much more complex than we imagined initially.
Exactly. And just to give two more thoughts on the effective microorganisms that Martin was mentioning, it's a fermentation process. So it's like a natural process of giving bacteria strains, mixing it with natural prebiotic stuff, like, for example, aloe vera or different other, like curcuma or ginger, whatever. And you start a fermentation process. And luckily, 1 year ago, 2 years ago, Martin introduced me to this effective microorganisms, and I was super fascinated by it. Actually, also, I have in my family a person who suffers big time from digestive issues, like very, very strong. And I did a test on her, and I told her, "Hey, I have an idea. Let's try some stuff, you know." And I gave it to her, and it got really, quickly, it got better. And I started last year in September to really dive super deep into this topic. And now I don't know, Ivan, I never told you, I think I have a natural supplement company running since a couple of years, focusing on gut health and skin health.
Interesting.
Yeah. So since September last year, I'm developing a product with effective microorganisms with this fermentation process, with also aloe vera and different types of things that are supposed to be super good for the gut health as well. And I think when we look at this complex system of a body, we always come back to the conclusion, until now at least, that natural processes, are the most, the best thing we can do. Like natural foods, like prebiotic, consume it in a natural way, not only powder and stuff, So the body then, with its own intelligence, can create everything that is needed because the body itself knows how it works. We just, our brains are the ones, we don't really understand it. So yeah, it's super interesting to always get back to the conclusion of natural lifestyle, good foods, variety. And I would like to hear your thoughts on, variety, we already said that it's very individual, and everyone has its own community of bacteria. But how important is a variety? And what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, we were I was saying in the beginning about scientists being conservative, right? So I agree. I tend to be on the side of let's stick to what nature gave us. So, for example, kimchi that people have in Korea, or kefir, or these natural foods, they give you the microbes, but they give you something else, either that stimulates the gut or it's contained in the product that really is going to be more beneficial. overall because of the complexity that we don't understand, right? So I think I totally agree, and the diversity issue relates, I think, directly to the fact of what I was saying before, that we don't know enough yet. So we know there is a huge diversity, but who is involved? Which bacteria process what kind of fibers, what kind of prebiotic, what do they release? It's something that science has been advancing very fast, but we still have several years until we get a better picture. So many of these bacteria can be cultured in the laboratory. The scientists can test what kind of prebiotic they prefer, what kind of metabolite they release. But essentially, because we don't know enough yet, using either whole foods, which I think is the best bet we have, or products that try to be as close as possible to whole foods, is what is going to give us the best results until we figure out better what is the biology involved in the diversity of the microbiome.
So maybe to come back to connecting the gut and the brain, and there's a lot of books and podcasts and studies, I believe, showcasing that if you have a mental disorder, from brain fog to ADHD, anxiety, depression, etc., it's usually linked to a dysbiosis in the gut. So maybe can you explain how does that happen, that someone who seems to be having gut issues then has this mental problem, and how is this connection happening? And maybe to understand this better, what's specifically happening there?
Yeah, so this is a super interesting topic, and it's again very complicated because the gut-brain axis or the gut-brain system is a two-way road, and it's difficult to dissociate in which direction things are working. So I'll give you an example. For example, of a topic that is much spoken about, which is the relationship between an altered microbiome and autism, right? So some people, for example, they propose that the altered microbiome often observed in autistic on individuals in the autistic spectrum may be underlying the alterations in brain processing compared to a neurotypical individual, right? So this favors the idea that the gut is reading what the microbiomes are releasing and sending this information to the brain and changing the brain because the microbiome is altered. On the other hand, you may also think that the intrinsic changes in brain processing associated with psychological states or certain conditions are driving changes in the microbiome, right? So we know that epidemiologically, a lot of mental states are connected to changes in the microbiome. And we can go, for example, in the case of inflammatory bowel disease, very often the episodes are preceded by situations of stress or worry. We have very common issues with gastric acidity or ulcers associated with chronic stress, etc. But it's very hard to dissociate completely which part of the axis, if it's the gut-brain or the brain-gut, that is underlying the effects, except in some experimental situations that sometimes do, but not always apply to human beings, right? So So this is I would say the connection is clear, but we may dive into a very complicated scenario where in some cases the bacteria in the gut are altering mental processes, but on the other hand, in many other situations, the intrinsic changes in the brain seem to be driving the changes in the microbiome. And in the case of stress, for example, the effects of stress, if you experimentally induce stress in an otherwise healthy organism, you're going to see that eventually the microbiome will be changed, favoring the idea that at least in some relevant situations, what initiates the alteration is the brain, is your environment, your psychological state that then impacts on the gut. So so again, it's a complicated issue, and again, a lot of studies are needed to dissociate the contributions of each part. Yeah,
there's also a trend in social media for a couple of weeks and months now that people are explaining their personal story on how they tried everything to heal their gut. And all the supplements and all the different diets didn't really work until they started working on their nervous system and lowering the stress situation. And then they started to be getting some positive results. So also here, that also underlines how important stress management and decreasing stress and having enough rejuvenation is important to have overall good health, obviously, but especially also for the gut. So, but I think this bidirectional situation between the gut and the brain and vice versa is so interesting, and probably says that you won't be able to, if you have a health issue, you will have to look at both ends instead of just looking at one end, right?
Yeah, I think it totally, as I was saying, you need to make sure that your body environment, the physiological conditions in your gut favor the growth of a healthy microbiome, that we don't even know exactly what it means. We know it's important to have a healthy microbiome, but we don't know necessarily exactly what should be there yet, right? But to me, if we take overall, the data is very clear that in many situations, if the nervous system is altered, it doesn't matter what you do to your gut microbiome. It's always going to be disrupted because the contributions from the nervous system to setting the gut environment are not there. So not enough mucosal release, acidity, changes in biorelease and movement and gut movement, etc., and then inflammation. This will never allow for an improvement if these altered signals are sustained over time.
And what do you propose if people feel like, oh, wow, I think this is me, I have to do something, with my nervous system? What is your take on that?
Yeah, I mean, this is kind of tricky, right? I never really had enough courage to go into what people should do because first, I'm not a clinician, but also it's so difficult, and I have many colleagues who are therapists, and we interact a lot about these issues, and it's so difficult to tell people like don't stress, right? Because that's not something that is consciously controlled. So definitely trying to keep a lifestyle that minimizes stress, a healthy lifestyle, it's going to definitely help, because the evidence is that when you promote a more parasympathetic kind of tone in your physiology and you decrease sympathetic activation, then you allow for the autonomic nervous system to set the digestive system in a more a natural way, right? So the parasympathetic system promotes, among other things, the digestion and the proper secretions that the gut need to handle food. And in situations of stress, this parasympathetic system loses its preference in favor of a sympathetic system that is preparing the body for potential threats or stresses, right? So when sustained in the long run, a pro-sympathetic system, that is a more stress-related system, drives down the ability of the nervous system to promote gut function in a normal way. So trying to minimize sympathetic activation, meaning having a less stressful lifestyle, doing things like exercise, or some people like meditation, or just like having a social circle you interact with. All those things have been demonstrated to reduce sympathetic activation, allowing for the parasympathetic system to dominate a little more, lowering heart rate, blood pressure, and promoting physiological processes in the gastrointestinal system that is going to ultimately favor a better microbiome and a better digestion. And I would put among those a healthy diet based on whole foods, rich in fibers and vegetables, because they also seem to these healthy components of food seem to be detected by nerves that are part of the parasympathetic system. So they drive the parasympathetic system. So you can cause the parasympathetic system to function more potently if you help it by stimulating it. And the way organisms evolved is associated with detecting natural foods in the body and activating the parasympathetic system to digest them. So eating a healthy diet, among other things, is going to favor the activation of the part of the autonomic nervous system that you would rather have activated in the long run.
Yeah, what's nice about the vagus nerve, I learned it like in the last months actually, to how to activate it. This is maybe not scientific, but this is actually like I feel it's working. For example, breathing, like there's like various breathing techniques, to really get into your body and get the parasympathetic up and the sympathetic
Yes.
down. So I think this is a very practical one that people can use. And also, I don't know what you think about this technique, but it's like summen, like bees. If you do like, you have this stimulation here, and it is supposed to also stimulate the vagus nerve. So doing this, also, if you remember, like people walking through the forest, being super in harmony, super balanced, no stress, and people start to sing. They start to sing, they start to chant, and I think also this chanting can be a very nice way to get into the body and to
Yeah, I am very open-minded about this. So, I mean, I think in the case of breathing, it's relatively clear that the balance between inspiration and expiration, depending on how you do it, you can favor the activation of the parasympathetic system, because among other things, the vagus nerve is sensing, for example, the expansion of the lungs, the thoracic system. And so again, like in the case of natural foods, if you can, let us say, naturally stimulate the sensory fibers of the vagus nerve to cause the other parts of the parasympathetic system to be engaged. And the singing and the vibration here, of course, it's totally possible. I am not aware of an experimental demonstration that the nerve itself is activated by. Probably there is evidence that the overall the parasympathetic tone increases, but because the nerves are running through our cervical areas, right? So these vibrations, these physical vibrations in this area are, I mean, it's not, it's plausible to think that they may produce an effect there too. And I think it makes sense. And yeah, in the case of breathing, you have meditation, yoga, that clearly may be one way, an efficient ways to do this stimulation protocol. And the same thing for singing. Yeah, I know about this. It's a very interesting observation, and I totally believe this is possible. Although, I mean, the experimental evidence may come more and more numerous in the future, but I have a very, let us say, positive view about those.
Probably anything and everything that helps you to get out of the hectic, stressy, busy day into being more playful, being less stressed, being grounded, etc. And everyone has their own way of being in that playful mode and bringing down the nervous system, right?
Yes, exactly. So it is very subjective, but what is interesting is we know that the vagus nerve is ultimately controlled by more, let us say, complex structures in the brain. So as you go further into the brain, from the brain stem all the way to the, let us say, more developed or more, let us say, primate parts of the brain, there is still a lot of communication. So because your brain overall changes, your emotional states, the stimulation you have changes, these changes are communicated to the vagus nerve via internal circuits that exist in the brain. So definitely, just by being on a positive state, this is probably going to cause positive effects in your overall body health, just because you are being able to activate the systems in an unconscious way. We can't really completely consciously control the autonomic system. That's why it's autonomic. But there is a lot of, let us say, shortcuts you can take by consciously driving the parasympathetic system by somehow engaging these internal connections in the brain that very clearly exist between the emotional parts of the brain, like an area called the amygdala or the others, to the neurons in the brain that control the parasympathetic system.
Beautiful. I have one more question, which is a different, quite like different topic. It's about detox. So I'm reading a lot about detoxing the gut, detoxing the whole body, the organism, and what I came across was that detoxifying the brain is actually the starting point. One should take, of course, the liver, and it's like a system, you know, so you have to detoxify basically everything. But do you know about how to brain detox? Do you know what supplements can help, or what vitamins, or whatever can help to detoxify the brain? And also, yeah, like whatever you know about this field would be very interesting to me.
Yeah, so this is another. I'm again. I don't really. I'm not a specialist at all on this area. So the brain has a natural barrier itself called the blood-brain barrier that prevents a lot of the a lot of compounds, including toxins, from reaching most of the brain. There are some areas that are still, we call leaky. They can still sense the composition of the blood, but most of the brain is protected. So I am not aware, and I don't want to go into something I'm not sure about. I'm not aware of any supplements one can take that could act inside the brain to change the chemical composition of the brain. But I think we can take this image of toxicity and apply it in general to mental states, right? So as we were saying, is stress or bad food or psychological distress in general, they are toxifying in their own way because they change the way the brain is regulating regulating body physiology. So again, dealing with the stress and lifestyle is one way to detoxify, but otherwise, I think when we think about supplements that may act in this way in the brain, it's always important to remember that the brain has this barrier and this protection against outside elements that are very difficult to analyze. You really need an invasive experiment to know what is inside the brain. Of course, there is research on this, but I think, again, going into this more conservative approach and fixing the way you eat and adopting healthy lifestyles, it's definitely going to help ultimately, right? Because even if there is toxification of the brain by chemicals, by correcting this with diet, it's one big step towards minimizing it.
And do you take any supplements, like away from like detoxifying the body, but do you take anything? Because I think supplements are a huge topic now. Everyone is supplementing and ordering different kinds of vitamins. Are you supplementing?
No, I try to eat foods that presumably function as prebiotics or in some case probiotics. So I like, I don't know, like yogurt, like fermented food. I try to eat a lot of fiber. So I use like the natural supplements that I have been trying to reduce paradoxically to some protein intake, especially from animal sources that don't fare very well overall in the long term in many epidemiological studies. So I try to favor not so much protein, but also protein from non-animal sources whenever possible. So I don't really supplement. I did at some point, but then I kind of forget about them. I also have this tendency to forget to take them. Yeah. So I have been trying to favor like this going for whole foods, like
natural approach.
Yeah, like fruits, legumes, etc. And maybe fermented food, seeds, nuts. I think, but I'm not saying there is anything wrong with supplements. It's just that the biology is so complex that, as we were saying, right, there is this million-age wisdom that nature gave us that allow us to get healthier by consuming things that were out there when we first evolved. So I try to do that. But I definitely agree with you that the supplements are becoming more and more sophisticated and closer to those. So, but I personally don't. I don't have anything a priori against it. But I have been trying to go more natural recently. Yeah,
I like the approach. So maybe coming towards the end of the session today, is there something we haven't discussed today that you feel like we should bring into the session at this point?
No, I think we covered a lot of very interesting topics. I think I think one, let us say, message that I think is important is that we I think we learn more and more about the biology, but there is a lot still to be investigated, and we should always be a little skeptical about easy formulas, right?
Really?
So in the sense of, like, you hear a lot of people saying, oh, take this diet, right? Eat in this way, or eat only meat, eat only keto, eat only whatever. Even there is a sugar-only diet that I learned about recently. So I think for us scientists, what is clear is very hard to fool nature, right? So the more we find out, the more we realize we don't know much. And the idea really is to try to be healthy by getting closer to nature, what nature already gave us, and not necessarily believe on easy ways to get away with things like, for example, drugs that reduce body weight. They are very helpful, but they are not necessarily the best solution in the long term. It is much better to replace medications always with a better lifestyle, for example, because we don't quite understand yet the consequences of long-term use of certain drugs. So I think, let us say, being realistic about our ignorance is always very important.
Thank you for these last words. I think
Very
there
well
was a
put.
lot of wisdom inside. Thanks. It was a huge honor to have you here, Ivan. I hope we see you again in our podcast, maybe on a second episode.
I would love to, yes.
Thank you so much.
Maybe just before we close off,
Sorry, okay.
and it doesn't have to be long, but just maybe if you have something top of mind as like a small tradition we try to do when we have it in our minds. Since the podcast is called Secrets of Wellbeing, do you have as an end note like a small secret to well-being from you personally?
Yeah, I mean, for me, I mean, as I say, I try to experiment, and in my case, although I hear a lot of advice to not over-exercise, but for example, exercising, I discovered this kind of a therapy for me. So I go, like, I do exercises, mostly using my own body weight, but it's like I hear interesting podcasts like yours, or I hear talks, and I do the exercise on my own pace, and I do the exercises I like. It has been a huge lifestyle change that I found out that really works well for myself. So I think it is important for people to keep this experimentation-driven approach to life, and trying what works well for you. That applies to food, to lifestyle, to exercising. So this is something that increased my well-being significantly, whereas like when I was younger, I thought it was just a waste of time. And if I had enough coffee and didn't eat junk food, I would be okay, and no need for exercising. And now I think, by trial and error, I figure out it's not so simple. Yeah.
Perfect. Okay, then from my side as well, what Nikki already mentioned, thanks so much for being our guest today. It was an absolute pleasure, and I think it's fantastic the work that you do and the research that you have been doing and pushing these things forward, especially towards gut health and brain health and the connection between it. So thanks a lot for making this a very important topic in the world.
Yeah, thank you. Was really great, exciting. I loved the questions, and I hope to be back.
Thank you, Ivan.
Thank you.
Thank you.
pop, 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 julep, pop, 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 julep.